Hello and welcome to our conference podcast series, Power of Potential, sharing experiences from Universal Design for Learning journeys. So welcome to our UDL podcast series, and today we've got the absolute pleasure of being joined by PhD student Elizabeth Hitches from the University of Queensland in Australia. Hello, hi, how are you?
Hi there. Lovely to be with you.
Brilliant. So we are the furthest we could possibly be from each other. I'm here at Worcester. You're in Australia, and there might be a bit of a lag with the podcast because of the brilliant things we're saying having to transcend the distance that it's going. So
Travel oceans.
yeah. Elizabeth, could you let me know what led you to be chatting to me today, making this podcast? Firstly.
Absolutely. So I'm really excited to be involved in the upcoming conference. I'm going to be presenting at that conference, and in that sense, we're going to be bringing together a community of UDL practitioners from all across the world. And so this wonderful opportunity came up to talk about what UDL might look like in my practice here in Australia, and of course, to hear what other practices look like in other parts of the world. So I'm really grateful to be joining you here today, and thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us and coming and sharing your insights. So we've got a set of 4 questions that we're kind of going to work through. My first question then, Elizabeth, is, in your words, how would you define Universal Design for Learning, UDL? How would you describe it?
I would describe it as an approach or a way of thinking about learning and teaching. So we're really approaching it proactively and thinking about a whole range of diversity of learners that might be taking part in that space, and a range of educators that might be in that space as well, and thinking about, with this really broad range of diversity that we want to really celebrate and value, how can we make sure that every single participant feels welcomed and valued? How can they have that fair and equitable access to the materials, the ability to really thrive and put forward what they know and communicate their learning, and engage in that really inclusive culture and that inclusive space where they can really achieve their full potential. So proactively thinking about how we can reduce barriers and make sure that every single person in that space has a really quality learning experience, but also a really positive learning experience as well.
That's fantastic. And there's sorry, I just bashed my microphone there, so it might have made a bit of a loud noise, but there's some really important themes I'm hearing about this, about the UDL approach, about it being proactive. So perhaps really thinking it through and designing it and planning it, rather than it kind of being a reactive, oh, how can we do this? And I love what you said about actually not only acknowledging diversity, but celebrating it and valuing it, and everybody feeling valued. So that sounds really positive, and quite a sort of positivist approach to learning and teaching, and that assembling diversity in learning spaces. Fab. So thinking about what you do in your setting at the University of Queensland, what does universal design look like in reality then at your university?
So thankfully, I research out of the University of Queensland, but I am lucky to teach out of the University of Griffith, all in the state of Queensland, Australia. And in that teaching space, we try to look not just at the micro level, so looking at the accessibility and inclusivity of a resource, but we also try to look at that macro level as well. So are there options around how students can engage in their learning? And so one of the things that we're currently working on with my convener, Stuart Woodcock, we're thinking about not just students who can join us in those live classes, whether it's in person or online, but what about those students who might, for some reason, have a medical appointment that day, or have care responsibilities and need to perhaps join asynchronously. How can we use universal design to really make that an inclusive opportunity for them too? So not only do they not miss out on learning, but they also have that really positive learning experience, no matter which mode they're joining from. So yeah, thinking through that micro level, thinking through that content, what's happening in those moments, what does it look like when students engage in class? But yeah, that macro level too, that way that students are going to join us and engage.
That's fascinating, and I wonder, going off the track of the regular questions, because this is really interesting. I wonder, does it look very different trying to apply universal design to asynchronous learning outside of the classroom to in the classroom? Is it different, or is it the same?
That's a really great question, and I think some of the ways that we do it currently, for some of the online courses that I teach, we will record one of those classes, and there can be really simple tweaks. So at the very beginning, on that recording, welcoming everyone who's present in the room, and also welcoming those who are joining us who are watching the recording. So as soon as that student presses play on that recording, they know they've been considered. So we're minimizing threats and distractions. They know it's a safe place for them to be. And then when we get to some of the activities that take place in these online classes, traditionally what might have happened is students get put out into breakout rooms. And so that recording would only capture what's happening in that main room. Then suddenly, the screen goes blank. You don't get to hear what's going on in that other room. You miss out. You don't feel like part of that team. But what we can actually do with universal design, we can think about how do we turn some of those group work activities into something meaningful for students who might. So in the class, when students get put into breakout rooms, I then turn around to the recording and whoever's watching that recording and say, okay, so now students are in breakout rooms. Here is what this activity can look like for you at home. And here's how you can engage and make sure they've got those links and any links to shared spaces as well. So yeah, you have to plan ahead to make it happen really seamlessly, but it doesn't take a lot of time. These can be very small actions that can help make it a more equitable learning experience.
That's I'd never considered that, Elizabeth. That's fantastic. Just demonstrating how that pre-planning and that proactiveness and something that's a really quick win could have such a huge impact on learners that are having to join in a different space or a different time in a different way. Oh, thank you for sharing that example. That's great. So why do you feel that UDL is so important?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. The very first one is that I really feel that when even ourselves, when we enter a particular environment, when you encounter barriers or you encounter attitudes that maybe make you feel like this wasn't designed for somebody like you miss out on all those positive benefits of inclusion. And so I think if a student is engaging in a learning environment and they're coming across barriers, we might actually be implying to them who has been considered by default and therefore whose voices are being valued by default and whose aren't. And I don't want any student to feel like they shouldn't be part of that learning environment or that it's not designed for students like them. So I think taking a universally designed approach is really key to showing every single student that every single student is valued and that not just valued, but their learning's been really highly considered so that they can have the best outcomes in that place.
Oh, I mean that's really, really clear. And it's interesting you talk about students being valued, but it sounds like the driver behind and the passion I can hear behind implementing UDL is value based in itself, to say actually this is the message we want to send to our learners loud and clear, that we value everybody and everybody's voices should be equitable. Incredible. Okay, so thinking about the future then, what are your hopes for how universal design for learning might be included in the future?
Well, I think it starts with some of the things that we're seeing in the environment at the moment. So, I don't like to mention the COVID pandemic, but it did happen.
Mm,
And we did
yeah.
see that during that time and following that time, students are experiencing higher levels of mental health challenges, higher levels of stress. And now in Australia, where we are, we know that a number of students are also in challenging financial circumstances. We have what's called a rental crisis. So there are so many extra stresses and work responsibilities and all these things that students are contending with in our current environments. And I think we need to be thinking about what UDL can actually do in terms of reducing barriers in our learning environment.
Mm,
So when a student encounters a barrier, let's imagine that a particular resource has a really high download size and the student is working from their car using mobile data and doesn't have that amount of data to do that. When you encounter a barrier like that, the additional stress that puts on that learning experience that perhaps may not need to be there. There are different ways
mm,
that we can work resources, or even when you're interacting in a space, if a student can't make it into class, there can be all this stress around missing out on learning, when in actual fact, if we have an alternative mode, a complementary quality mode, it just removes that uncertainty. They don't feel like they're missing out. So I think for the future, I'd love to see us exploring what some of those mental health benefits of a truly inclusive and universally designed space might be, even in terms of feelings of belonging. If you feel like you can really thrive in that space and it was designed for learners just like you, what does that do to students' mental health as well? So thinking about accessibility for sure, and making sure we really keep our interest and research around, equitable
mm.
access and equitable opportunities, and responding to the diversity of ways that people learn and express themselves. But yeah, really having a focus on, well, what are actually the benefits for mental health and those positive learning experiences as well.
I mean that's fascinating, Elizabeth, because I think I mean I'm not an expert or overly knowledgeable on UDL, but when I read when I'm reading sort of research and I'm thinking about its application, I really am thinking about it very much in a learning setting. And it might just be me, but I'm not really making those direct links there between what does that mean for the holistic learner and their mental health. And that's such an important foundation for them and how they learn. Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing all of these just brilliant
Thank you.
insights into the work that you're doing and what's happening in your setting. I have come to the end of my questions, but I just wondered if there was anything else you wanted to add or wanted to say before we draw the podcast to a close.
I just think this has been a really lovely reflection opportunity, and I can't wait to hear what's happening in other parts of the world. So thank you to you and your team for bringing this together, and hopefully bringing all of these diverse voices around the world together on UDL practice.
Oh, it's absolutely our pleasure, and thank you again for giving up your time to talk to us and and um and let us listen to everything that you're doing. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.